Good afternoon, all. Are we going to have an enlightening conversation today? We are going to talk of the hottest thing out of the pipes of Albany, New York. We are going to talk about the the legalization of marijuana. In fact, we're going to talk about the business of cannabis. And my name is Senator James Sanders Jr., and you are on the podcast that is called Let's Be Clear. There's too much fuzzy thinking out there, too many ideas going up in smoke, too much haze, purple or otherwise, that we have to cut our way through. This is a podcast designed to get to the common ideas, to the bare minimum of what's going on and things that we can all understand. And with that in mind, we are going to talk about the business of cannabis. Now, get ready, Brad. I'm going to ask you to tell us what hath God wrought, which is the first words that was given on the Morse code. Uh, what have God wrought of Albany? What have we done up in Albany? And then we could talk about uh, the business of this whole thing and who will profit, who will not, and if you were to profit, how would you go about it? But Brad, you've had a hand in this pot business, I believe, or you had a finger in the pot. I don't know. You were involved somehow. And would you be kind enough to explain who you are, what your role in this, and who do you work for? Would you be kind enough, sir?
Sure. My name's Brad Usher, and I'm State Senator Liz Krueger's Chief of Staff. Senator Krueger, along with Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes, first introduced the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act in 2013, and 7 years later, we've passed the bill, which legalizes cannabis, establishes an Office of Cannabis Management to set up the business side of this and regulate it, and also creates a social and economic equity program that is designed to ensure that this is not an industry dominated by the many people over the years I've met with who would like to dominate this industry but are not from communities disproportionately impacted by the drug war. So that's my very short introduction as to what the bill is. I'm happy to go into a lot more detail if you like, excruciating detail if you'd really like.
Well, just a little bit more. I hope it won't be that painful
Sure.
for you. I heard there's some medicinal purposes that all of this can serve at the end of it. I want to tell me about the devastated communities that have been devastated by the war on drugs, which turned into the war on poverty. And what does this bill have to do with them?
So anybody who's been following this issue knows that our drug laws and especially our cannabis laws have been enforced in racist ways. They've been enforced against communities of color, just at vastly greater levels than against white communities, and despite the fact that people of all colors use cannabis at basically the same rates. In fact, if there's any differences, white people actually use it slightly more, and depending on age. So what this bill tries to do, first of all, it tries to address those interactions with law enforcement that have been happening because of cannabis by broadly decriminalizing possession under 3 ounces, and eliminating penalties so that even for small possession amounts, if you have a small, or if for even small violations, there are relatively small penalties. If you have a lot of cannabis, you can still get in more trouble. On the assumption that it's for sale outside of the illicit market. So there's the decriminalization piece, which is to address the disproportionate enforcement of cannabis laws. But then there's what are we going to do to address the wrongs that have been done because of the drug war? And there are 2 things we can do. One is we can try to ensure participation by people from communities disproportionately impacted by the drug war in the new industry. And this is particularly important because people are working now in the illicit market. We need to figure out how to transition them into the legal market. And that is, in fact, one of the categories that makes you a social and economic equity applicant. There are a number of categories, but one is people who are currently have had law enforcement interactions, or their families have had law enforcement interactions because of cannabis. So the social and economic equity program is designed to provide loans, grants, incubator programs, and a goal of 50% of licenses going to equity applicants as a way of ensuring that there are business opportunities. The other side of it is, what do we do with the revenue? I think one of the great things about this bill, and I think one reason why it may be better that it took this long to pass it, is we were able to protect the revenue in a way that we really wanted to do. So 40% of the revenue is going to be reinvested through a community reinvestment fund in communities disproportionately impacted by the drug war. And there's a long list of purposes that the money can be used, from healthcare to job training to reentry programs, a whole host of different things that would be, the idea is they'd be grants to nonprofits rooted in those communities to provide services. Another 20% of the revenue will go for drug treatment and education. It is like any illegal or legal substance that is mind altering. There are potentials for abuse with cannabis, and there's plenty of potentials for abuse of other drugs as well. And this will provide additional drug treatment money, both for cannabis, but also for drugs that are actually more of a problem from a drug treatment perspective, like opioids.
Now, Brad, I'm going to stop you
Okay.
because you
I
were
told you I could go on
100%
forever.
true. You said that you could speak for years on this issue, 7 at least, and I believe that you can. But I'm going to go from the mega to the micro here. We are going to speak about if a person was going to get into the drug business. We're going to speak to. We're going to go with the green rush, and then after the green rush, we're going to speak of if people of color wanted to get into this business. And I'm hoping that Miss Dawson could bring us home. But if you can't do all of this in a safe and secure way, then you've lost it all, no matter what you've done. So some people say that cannabis cannot be secure, but Jim and Ellen say cannabis secure. And we'll speak to them on this one in that order. But Zeta, the last will be first here. Mr. Zeta Ceti, you are the founder and chief executive officer of the Green Rush, and there is a Green Rush taking place in New York.
Yes, sir.
What would you recommend to any entrepreneurs right around now?
Well, first off, it's all about education. Okay. It's very important to have education and knowledge when you're going through these processes as an entrepreneur, as a seasoned business owner, into a new state that has a brand new set of laws that are coming out, as Brad said. As my company was a company that fostered one of the first social equity programs here in the United States out of Oakland, California. And now we've seen it come full circle. So the terms of participation, it's all about being a part of that conversation. Senator, I want to enroll you into the genesis to invent a new set of possibilities.
You said roll or enroll?
Enroll.
Okay, I'm sorry. I heard roll. Go ahead, sir.
No problem. And these possibilities are creating new economic opportunities for the state of New York and its citizens. And that includes everyone, whether you are participating in a plant-touching business or a non-plant-touching business, because it's not just about handling the plant and being a part of a dispensary license or cultivation or manufacturing. It's also a part about the supporting businesses that are also have a major amount of opportunity when it comes down to it. And that could be based on your current profession right now, right? So let's just say, you are doing a construction company. That construction company can participate in this industry and actually, be able to profit off of it due to the opportunity that's happening. I mean, just like in the gold rush days, the people that were making money weren't the people mining the gold. Same thing applies here. So I don't want to, just think that the only opportunity is all about doing, growing the plant or touching the plant or any of that, because there's a significant amount of opportunity on the other side in terms of these ancillary support businesses. such as security, for instance. And securities are a very important part of this process. In terms of making sure there's a transparency, there's integrity, associated with how this plant goes all the way from the top of the supply chain all the way down to the end user, right? And so a lot of these different pieces of it, just you really have to look at from a different type of lens in order to understand what that opportunity is.
So let me first things first say to everybody, put your information in the chat so that if people want to get in touch with you later, they have the ability. Please do so. So from what you're saying, sir, it is like the gold rush that you may be right that the majority of the money that was made in the gold rush wasn't the miners. They certainly didn't make the money. But a lot of places started from there. Levi's pants, I mean, all kinds of stuff came out. I wonder if there's going to be a cannabis pants. Well, wait a minute.
Definitely.
Well, it's a funny business, I say. So under those conditions, we need to work on our models. Speaking of working on these models, so Ms. Dawson, all a person of color has to do is just put their hands out and they're going to get green and go get rich from this stuff. And it's just easy, and just all you got to do is just say, I'm here for mine.
Would it be that easy, Senator Sanders? I'm sure that you could talk. There are already a number of people of color working in the industry in other states, and even here in New York, working on the advocacy side, working to support the pioneering work of Senator Liz Krueger and Assembly Member Crystal Peoples-Stokes to help New York pass the most equity-centered legalization that the country has thus far. So in talking to them, you will know that and anybody working in cannabis, that there's no such thing as like a quick pot of gold in this industry. As Zeta alluded to, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There are certainly opportunities. And one of the things that my own personal network and I have been trying to communicate to folks on the ground who are looking for additional access to cannabis, both from a health perspective as plant-based medicine, and also from the economic side, is the fact that while there are opportunities, you can use your existing skill set, you can leverage that and bring it into the industry. As a matter of fact, Dashida Dawson, my sister, so family plug, wrote a book called How to Succeed in the Cannabis Industry, which really kind of embodies that picks and shovels approach that Zeta was just talking about, taking what it is that you do and bringing it into the space so that you don't have to be concerned about capitalization and the kind of resources that one needs in order to start a plant touching business. That being said, because of the really visionary way that this bill was imagined, even as we are thinking about the regulatory framework that can do justice to what Senator Krueger and Assembly Member Crystal Peoples-Stokes envisioned, there will be resources available for people that want to be in the industry, whether we're talking about licensing. Like right now, there's like 50% of the licenses are designed to be social equity, so that people who come from communities most harmed, which tend to be Black and brown folks, can have access to low cost or no cost loans, grants, an opportunity to get in without the kind of capitalization which could easily run north of $1 million if you're trying to start a dispensary or even any sort of plant touching business. There's an opportunity for micro businesses, so having the full benefit of the vertical industry, but just on a smaller scale. So there is tremendous opportunity for community of colors here. That's part of what the 7-year fight was really about. But the first step is really educating yourself about the cannabis industry, understanding what elements are needed to have a successful industry, the types of licenses that will be available, whether we're talking about a distribution license or a delivery license, which doesn't necessarily involve like the plant touching side, in terms of growing it and the kind of capitalization that needs, or, working in tandem with a team to help actualize a micro business or some other social equity effort. So the first thing people really need to do is to understand the cannabis industry, both from the medical side and the adult use, and where they will best fit.
Well, I'm going to show my mean and evil side. I'm going to hit Brad with a question. You guys are my guests, so I have to be nice to y'all. But Jim and Ellen, you're right up after Brad. And after he fumbles on this one, I'm going to ask you the same question. So listen carefully. Now, I am the father of MWBE in New York City and New York State. I wrote the laws on minority and women-owned business enterprises at New York City level and at New York State level. All right. One of the flaws, one of the problems that we have in the law is something that's known as men in skirts. Men in skirts. All right. No, it doesn't mean that. It means something else. It means that there are people who are putting up women to say that typically white men are putting up white women and saying, you are the minority. I'll give you a nice coat. You'll take a trip to Europe, do whatever. I'll do the real work and I'll make the real money, but I'll hand you a couple of hundred, a couple of thousand or whatever it is. And they are fronts. We are dealing and grappling with that. All right, Brad, and Jim and Ellen, you're next. Brad, how do we deal with men in hemp skirts?
Well, I think that's definitely an issue, and I can't remember there are numbers in the bill about percentage ownership, but even if you have say, I mean, I know there's a 51% number in one place. Even if you have 51, the 49 could be, the problem. In some ways, this is one where the agency, the bill does give a lot of power to the agency in creating a social and economic equity plan, which is both a potentially great thing, but also a risk because they're going to have to be dedicated to that. And certainly advocates and legislators who care about this are going to have to be looking at who is developing the social and economic equity plan and how are they addressing that issue and a host of other issues around how we roll out the social and economic equity program. So I won't say that there's no risk of that happening. I think that we will need to be vigilant in looking at how social and economic equity is defined, what are the requirements both that are in the legislation, but also then in the plan that is developed by the agency. And one of the things that we did, there's a social and economic equity officer, and we made them subject to the appointment by the board, but we required 4 of the 5 board members to vote for them, which means that in effect, the legislature, if they do not like who the board is appointing, can block them. And that was the hope is that the legislature will then say, we don't think this person is committed to social and economic equity or doesn't have the knowledge base, which is also important. They could be wonderful for social and economic equity, but if they don't understand how that is going to play out, they could get played by somebody. So that's one of the things we've sort of reserved for the legislature in this process. We can't force the board to take somebody, but we can stop them from taking somebody we don't like.
Now, Ellen and Jim, I have put up a problem of men in hemp skirts. You're saying that can it be secure? And I'm wondering, can it be secured? You believe that it can. What does your company do, and how would you handle such a problem, Ellen and Jim?
So Senator, there's no hemp skirts here, sir, in our organization, and I'm gonna turn this over to the better half of our organization, Ellen Bolin, to take that further. But we are 63% woman owned. I have a minority stake in our particular company here, and I will turn it over to her.
So we're both minorities then.
Yeah.
Ellen, please
Yes,
save
both
me.
minorities. Yes, we became a certified woman-owned business, which, by the way, is not an easy task. Brad, I'm sure you know this. They put us through the ringer, so to speak. Our founder, Tracy Kaufman, owns, between her and I, we're 63% owned, as Jim said. But it was such a tough process to get through and prove that we specifically were the owners, woman-owned business. They came to her home because she wasn't working out of an office at that time because of COVID, and they wanted to make sure she was at the forefront along with myself. And to date, Tracy now volunteers for the WBENC and helps people. That's part of our offering, actually, helps people go through the whole certification process. So,
Well,
yeah.
tell me about your company, because I'm about to hit Imani with the same question of men in hemp skirts, and then I'm going to rush to Zeta. But
I'll
tell
give
me
you
about your company. What do you do, and what are the things that you guys can offer, even as New York City seems to come into my living room?
Yep. So we have three pillars of our business, Senator. So we offer business consulting, security consulting, and regulatory compliance consulting to cannabis-related businesses nationwide. So what does that mean? On the front end, we write business plans for applicants. You need a business plan where you're going to start any kind of business, and we help applicants write a cannabis-related business plan along with a pitch deck. And then Ellen's husband, Michael, is a retired executive from UBS. He worked at UBS for 37 years, Wall Street executive, held every role at UBS except the CEO role over his time there, went back to Columbia and got his executive coaching degree. So what we found in this business is people that get licenses in this business have not necessarily run a successful business. And we're there to guide them and coach them through executive coaching on building a sustainable, profitable business through whatever the exit strategy may be, whether it's M&A activity, growth, or expansion. And then security consulting, we write the security plan for an applicant. So the security plan in every state is typically the highest point getter on the application. So a robust security plan is very important. We employ two vets. We have a Purple Heart recipient on our team, and we have a former Navy SEAL on our team out of Poughkeepsie, New York. That's our chief risk officer. So between them and my background in cybersecurity, we write these robust security plans. And then we do physical security beyond the license. When somebody gets their license, we help implement all the physical security, safes, vaults, door access controls, safes, etc., cameras, and then regulatory compliance. We work aside with a grower, a cultivator, a processed manufacturer on ensuring that they are meeting the regulations of the state and the federal government from an OSHA perspective at this point. The FDA will surely be getting involved in this business from a regulatory perspective, and we're there to actually assist clients that are in that space. So I'm going to stop there, Senator. I know it was a lot of information I threw out, and we appreciate you having us on the podcast.
So you guys help from seed to sale.
Yes.
Well, I tell you. But Ms. Dawson, what is to prevent some very clever fellow from finding a down and out person and saying, here's $5,000. You are now by the powers invested in me, you are now the big CEO and bottle washer of my hustle cannabis plant. And I'll just take you take the 5,000. Don't worry about the rest. What's going to prevent that?
Well, first of all, as the owner of an MWBE certified business in New York City and New York State, I must salute Ellen and Jim and their company because it is quite a process to undertake. And, Senator Sanders, we just co-sponsored an event together with Black Government Contracting Club to have our mayoral forum, which was very successful. So you know that I'm very active in this space, and cannabis is one of the many hats that I wear. And ultimately, it comes down to, as Brad mentioned, oversight. it's human nature to try and take an advantage when, you know, people perceive one. And it's really up to the regulatory framework that's built out to really evaluate every application and ensure that the equity that was intended is followed through on the applications, and that there aren't you know, opportunities for fraud and abuse of the system, which ultimately hurts everyone. And I am confident, given the amount of attention that was put into the bill and the courage that it took, you know, legislators like you, like Senator Liz Krueger, and the majority leader, that having worked so hard to create legislation, like a legal framework that is equity centered, that when it comes to how it's actually administered, that same level of attention to detail will be there, and that there will be opportunities for people to go to their legislators, you know, their elected officials, if they feel like something is awry, or they need, you know, that the system isn't working the way that it was intended to. So attention to detail, you know, in the regulatory framework is really important. Making sure that that equity officer has real power to review the applications and has a say, so that we can have the inclusive industry that folks fought so hard for. I'm confident it can be done, just like, you know, based on my experience as an MWBE certified business owner, that I know, you know, when we get together and we talk to legislators, when we self advocate, that we can make the system better.
I like the system being made better. In fact, I'm going to rush to Green Rush because I want them to answer my men in hemp skirts, and then I want them to tell me where do I put my money once I'm making all this money. Where do I? And please don't tell me under my pillow.
Well, first off, Senator, it's a really important subject and topic here. I'm really actually glad that you brought this up. You know, I have 25 years experience in the cannabis industry, ever since California passed Proposition 215 in 1996. And over the last decade, my company has helped entrepreneurs over 100 plus licenses across 14 states and 2 countries. So I've seen everything under the sun in terms of, you know, these types of situations. Now, you know, when the social equity program came out in Oakland, we saw a lot of these different scenarios where minorities were put almost as a pawn into an opportunity for other folks, right? And they never were able to get above and beyond, or even be an operator for that matter, when it was kind of framed to be. And this is an important subject. And so what we're seeing now is a revolving into the state of New York, where we're trying to do as much as we can from an application perspective or a licensing and regulatory perspective. But at the end of the day, it's really about protecting these folks and making sure they have the correct education and the correct representation, honestly. Because there's all these types of back-end agreements that can happen. We're not involved in any of those conversations, right? We don't know how they're being impacted, how they're being drawn on and lured into this opportunity, you know, based on this dangling carrot, right? I mean, these are the kinds of situations that happen. I've seen it over and time and over again. I've represented clients where that's happened, and I may personally had to tell them, like, no, this isn't right. You can't do that, right? And it's important to have values. Like, values are a very important piece to this puzzle when it comes to looking at these organizations and seeing how they're coming in and really treating their employees, or really treating their, you know, their members or their partners, and how are they going to implement that into their best practices and their standards going forward, right? And that includes the application. Look, in terms of the regulatory body that's really governing this process of the application or licenses, their guardianship over top of that scenario is over after that process. I mean, they're going to go on and go into operation, and we could see that happen later on down the line, right? So if the subject is, and the importance is to put an end to this, you know, this issue here, it's really about educating these folks to ensure, one, that they're protected, and two, they understand what to look for. And in my opinion, I've seen it happen too many times where they've been put into that position. And that's just not fair. That doesn't, you know, really govern the spirit of why, you know, we're doing this in terms of social equity.
Well, I'm glad you spoke to that, but I want you to tell me, and then perhaps Ellen and Jim can do this also. So where do I put my money? Okay, I'm in it, and I'm starting to make money. Where do I put my money again?
Your money, okay, so your money is going to go wherever your heart is, right? I mean, I think that at the end of the day, if you're passionate about it, if you're passionate about cultivation, manufacturing, dispensing, I mean, all three of those are three different types of businesses, right? Different business models, different parts of the supply chain, right? So wherever your profession is, or wherever you think you can really leverage that experience and land it there, that's where I would recommend to start, and then moving into other types of license categories if that's the case. You don't need to, you can be a spectator on an investor on the sidelines and really make a profit in some of this. You just have to choose wisely in one of those. Now, each one of those have separate different risks. Obviously, cultivation has a high amount of risk because we're dealing with a variable organism that could die at any moment, or you can lose your whole crop, et cetera. Now we have crop insurance, which is great. But you have different levels of this and different levels of scaling too as well. So for instance, with the dispensary, it's like the scalable model with a dispensary is really truly franchising, right? Because if you can't have a delivery license or an on-site consumption license, or if it's not vertically integrated, then you're not really able to scale. And so that's really the true essence of how you're able to really build a business and have it, have longevity over the course of a long period of time, is either by scaling by footprint or scaling by IP, one of the two. And there's many other ways.
I'm going to mess with you. I'm going to mess with you, sir.
Please.
As the chair of business, the chair of banking, I actually am using the lawyer's rule that I never ask a question that I don't know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, imagine I'm in business and I've got my dispensary, or for that matter, any of these allied businesses. Now, what was that bank that you mentioned that I can put my money in?
I didn't mention a bank.
You didn't.
I did not.
What was that?
I didn't mention no bank.
Mention one. I don't mind.
I didn't mention no bank.
Is that right? Well, Jim and Ellen, go ahead and tell me which bank I can use again.
So, in all seriousness, there are banks that are accepting cannabis cash, and it's typically banks that don't have to adhere to the FDIC. And you're seeing a lot of credit unions, get into the cannabis business, and they're typically local community, kind of credit unions that are taking cannabis cash. There's large fees associated with it, but it is a place where you can park your money.
Okay, for those who didn't pick up in the broadcast, we're in a strange new world that we're dealing with, where the states that have been a laboratory of creativity, while the federal government has been less than that, shall we say. Even under the Biden administration had been less than that. And it has created a situation where cannabis is still a Class A felony, I believe, and one should be very careful and get professional help when you are entering this area, so that you can make sure that you're not on the front pages when everything is said and done. This is an area where you certainly need to get in touch with someone. Did I say that decent, Ms. Dawson, or is there anything that you'd like to add to that? Or should I cease while I'm ahead?
You are funny. I think you raise a really big, an important point that people should understand. Like, there is no quick cash in or out of cannabis right now. It is a long game. While we are seeing things change very rapidly on the ground with states, and even like the national level with advocacy, like the Koch brothers are now in the lobbying effort and are going to be part of a group that's going to be lobbying Republican senators.
You say I'm funny. The Koch brothers are now in this
right? Exactly.
Listen, please.
So things are changing now. But right now, as of this moment, it is still federally illegal, which complicates things when it comes to banking, when it comes to being in business. and having the kind of write-offs that business owners are used to, those don't exist for cannabis business owners. So we definitely have to be smart about it, and we have to play a long game. And I also just want to bring up a population that's very central to this conversation that we haven't mentioned yet, and those are the folks in the legacy market, who have been part of, the markets that have existed in gray and, illicit spaces, and making sure that those people aren't further criminalized for an industry that is essentially legal now and is just beginning and is nascent. And so C.E.A.S.E is a nonprofit, a 501c3. The C stands for Cannabis Education Advocacy Symposium and Expo, and we provide community-based education around the health and economic benefits of cannabis as a plant-based medicine, and also as an industry for communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, so that those folks can get into the conversation as well. And one of the great things about our MRTA now law is that the equity and the tax revenue that's been set aside for communities most harmed is going to go back into community reinvestment, and also provide resources for people to enter the industry. And C.E.A.S.E we are planning a conversation about how we incorporate those folks into our emerging industry on April 30th, and I will be sure to provide that information to your office and in the chat below for people who are interested in joining us, because when we're talking about inclusion for communities of color, we've got to be talking about our legacy operators as well.
Very interesting, and I thank you for that. But Brad, just as there is big tobacco, there is big cannabis. What is to prevent big cannabis 5 years from now just buying all the little guys out and say, all right, all of you have had your moment, scoot, and we will Walmart this whole thing. We'll just go down to the corner, and instead of your CVS, it'll be Cannabis VS. I don't know. What's to prevent that?
So a couple of things. I mean, that will, again, that will always be a risk that we as you as legislators and the advocacy community will need to be watching. The bill makes it really hard to transfer a equity license, and pretty much impossible to a non-equity applicant. So that's one. They can dominate. The fear is that they'll dominate the industry in other ways, and I think the bigger thing that we need to watch for is big players basically making it's very, one reason that a lot of places have not succeeded in equity is it's hard to do. You're competing against people who are publicly traded companies, have access to huge amounts of money, and MRTA does its best to try to level that playing field, but it's not an easy thing. The 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 other thing I'll say is that's one reason why we chose not to allow the industry to be vertically integrated. I mean, with minimal exceptions, where that will keep large companies from being distributors, growers, and sellers, except for we do allow the medical, a limited number of retail licenses, and then we allow for the micro business licenses, which again is a way to allow smaller operators, social equity operators, to actually be vertically integrated in some situations. But another issue we were trying to deal with was in New York State alcohol, there's a distributor tier which is really just a couple of companies that control alcohol distribution, and we worked on trying to get around that problem. They made a security argument, and it's absolutely true. A more centralized industry is easier to prevent diversion and other things like that. But those are important goals, but they can't supplant the equity goals of the bill. So, but it's not, the fight on that issue is not over. It's just beginning.
Why don't you tell them what murder stands for?
Oh, Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act. That's
Well,
because it's old, and that it was before we started using cannabis as much.
well, that's all right. That's all right. I like this one because I'm about to question: has murder been murdered already? And I question you in this way: 40% of the murder revenue is supposed to go to education, if I understand this right. In fact, why don't you say where these things go, and
Okay.
then I'll pose my question.
Yeah. So there's three pots. The one that is sort of the central purpose of the bill is the community reinvestment fund, which Imani was talking about, and that's the money aimed to go back into communities disproportionately impacted by the drug war. And it's critical that it go to organizations from those communities, because the idea that, particularly about bringing people from the legacy industry into the legitimate industry, that's going to require people that there's going to be require a level of trust. So that's really important. And that's not going to be outside people who are going to be able to provide that. The second is 40% to schools and public education. That's money that is basically put into the the education lottery fund with a no replace it with a, I can't remember you're not supposed to, you can't substitute it for other money that education was getting. And then the final category is drug treatment prevention and education, but that education pot is really about drug education, youth use, things like that.
Let me show you two problems with this one, sir. The first one is and they're related, of course. And the first one is the high cost of entry into this field. I was up in Massachusetts, and I studied all of this up in Massachusetts, which is a state close enough to us that is legal before we were. And all of their social equity, in fact, all over the nation, sir, nobody had been very successful in social equity. No one has been successful. Part of it because the high cost of entry. It to buy a armored car is more than 500,000. To open up a dispensary in Massachusetts costs $1 million before you stock it. Before you pay your employees, and then so you got a high cost of entry. And then one problem, we're dealing with another problem of the murder, the 40%. Now, sir, that 40%, everybody's feeding on that 40%. The arts programs, the anti-violence, all kinds of people are reaching into that 40%. We did not designate and say 20%, 50, whatever percent can only go to businesses. Now, all of these other places have large constituencies. Business typically has a small constituency. In a place that is giving out money, how are we going to guarantee large amounts of this money go to the business, the fledgling business community?
Well, the first thing is that the revenue side is important. As a business is one of a number of things that's important in that, but the revenue isn't coming in right now. So we need that money up front. And that's coming in through the licensing process, and specifically through the reason we're letting the ROs play in the adult use market as vertically integrated.
ROs, sir.
Registered organizations. Sorry,
all right. All right.
I speak cannabis sometimes. The registered organizations are the medical providers. They will have to pay basically a social equity fee up front in order to have access to to the retail market. That money will be what's going to fund the grants and loans, the incubator programs, the things like that, that if we wait until the revenue comes, it will be too late because the industry will be established, then you will lose. I mean, and I'm not saying it's not difficult to make a social equity program work, but the advantage of watching what has and hasn't worked in other states, or largely hasn't worked, is one of the things that shaped this bill. And one of the questions was, how do you get the money up front in order to fund what entities will need to compete with? And also, how do you create an industry where we're not gonna, I mean, if the agency works the way we want it to work, speed of getting this market up going is not a priority. The priority is you don't get your big license until we have the social equity applicants in place. You know, that we're going to, the timing of this has to be nobody gets a head start on the social equity applicants. And
now,
that's,
Brad, it is conceivable, or better yet, is it not conceivable that a year can go by, not the first perhaps, but during the time that this board that's making these decisions, is it conceivable that when they have all of these different programs coming before them, that not one business is funded?
no, I mean, the certainly that would be a total failure of the program. And I mean, but the program won't start if we're not funding social equity applicants. So
I don't mean the first year, perhaps the second or third. Is
well,
it not conceivable? Is there anything in place to
there's
lock down?
you're right. There is no
business?
saying that we can't, that instead of funding reentry programs, we have to fund businesses. You're right. That there's, I mean, there is a pot of, there is a board which legislators have appointees to that will be determining this, and the purposes in that are related to redressing the wrongs done by the drug war. One of those wrongs is certainly economic opportunity, but it's not the only one. People who are coming out of prison are also an important constituency for that. So we've tried to the legislature will have a role in it. If the legislature's appointees choose not to fund businesses, then maybe and you don't like that, then you should choose other appointees to the board.
Well, let me be clear with everyone. It was not Brad that voted on this. It was me and my peers. Let's be clear.
And I will defend.
I am beating up Brad. He is my sacrificial lamb for the day. But if anyone is to take blame, it is not Brad and not me, right? But it's closer to me and my peers. Let's be clear that any legislation is a compromise, my friends. And these points have been raised by many people. We are not the only ones to raise this. Everyone up here, every panelist up here could have raised, if not raised, these and better questions. Let's be clear. But at the end of the day, the sausage was made this way. The law was passed in this fashion. Laws are not a finite thing. Laws are, we can amend, we can do things if we believe that it is not working well. And I would expect C.E.A.S.E to be the first to tell us to start under those conditions as we get rushed by the consultants from Green Rush and other places. Because at the end of this, cannabis can be secure and we can make it into what we need it to be. Now, I'm going to do a program. I'm going to do a hybrid, my friends. I'm going to actually go into the highways and byways in my immediate community. I'm going to go up to my street corner pharmacists. I am going to go to my street level capitalists, and I'm going to tell them to come to a program. I'm going to have socially distanced and all kinds of stuff going in but I want them to come and hear about this. But I'm also going to Zoom this program. I probably will do it with some groups up in Rochester and other places around the state. And we are going to speak for 45 minutes. We're going to speak of how do you expunge your records. And for the hour and a half, we're going to speak of the brass tacks of creating a business. How do you go about creating a business? And I am encouraging and inviting you guys to participate in that one. That one is, man, that's going to be interesting. And, I will, if people want to keep their mask on, well, we all supposed to keep our mask on. So that helps us right there. So if people want to keep their mask on and have glasses, that'll look normal under these conditions. So, I mean, we're going to have, this one is going to be really interesting. I'm going to personally go knocking on some doors in my community and inviting people and telling them that everybody needs to go legit, that everybody needs to stop while you're ahead. Stop while you're ahead and go legit on this thing. At least come and hear the advantages, etc. And if we could make this work, that will be interesting. Have you ever had any of that type of stuff, Zeta? Have you ever had, real operators come to you and say that they want to go legit?
100%. I mean, as a consultant, like you're in between, operators in the legacy market, as Imani said, and bringing them into the regulated market. Okay, and another interesting thing about New York is they got this other license type called Small Business Adult Use Cooperative License.
Say again.
Small Business Adult Use Cooperative License,
okay.
Which I saw.
Okay.
And, it's something very similar to medical marijuana collectives in California under Proposition 215, which you have like a small business in your home or however you want to do it. And you're able to sell to retailers, or you're able to sell to wholesalers or distributors. This is something that really lowers the barrier of entry, for a lot of these folks, right? And it's yet to be seen how it's going to be regulated. But at the end of the day, that is something that definitely opens up, a lot of opportunity for these folks coming out of the legacy market and into the regulated market. And so again, how does that fare with one of the questions that was said earlier about, big business coming in and really taking this over? Well, really coming from a position of strength as opposed to a position of weakness. It's really important for these folks to understand they can build a brand that way and start small and have building blocks to bring them up to that level and find an exit at that, at that stage, or sustain as a micro business, right? So I don't think that, just because big business comes in and it's inevitable that they're going to, it's just really about how you look at it and the lens that you look at it at, in my opinion.
Well, I think that's very interesting, and because when I went up to Boston and Boston, as they like to say, and I looked at some of the largest dealerships. Can't do that one either. Dispensaries. Oh, I love this language. Oh, we cleaning up stuff. So I went in there and I saw that they did not have some of the better brands on the street. They did not have Acapulco Gold. They did not have Thai Stick. They did not have Hawaiian. They did not have a lot of stuff, which means that your little cultivators may have a niche. Maybe there is something that these guys can, and women, of course, can grow that the larger guys, for whatever reason, are not growing. It may be an interesting thing, because I was very surprised that, well, anyway, I'm revealing too much, and I would have to confess in a moment. Let me do confess that I've been drug free for more than 40 years. So under those conditions, I did see that there were large segments that was simply not covered. The stuff that they were manufacturing was homogenous, if you wish, which means that there were, you know, niche markets, that niche industries that could be created, especially if they had the ability to sell to a larger place. So your point is an interesting point. Now, Jim, how on this planet, if I created my cottage industry of Acapulco Gold, uh, how the heck do I secure that?
So, as far as a dispensary, I mean, you know, cybersecurity and physical security are two of the most important elements. And people in this business tend to forget about the cybersecurity element. If you're in a medicinal state, that's patient data you need to protect, right? You have web security, email security, and Wi-Fi security. People forget about as well. But from a physical security perspective, 90% of theft occurs from within a dispensary or a grow. And is making sure you're doing security audits, physical security audits, that you're testing your systems to make sure that they're operating.
Wait a minute. You're thinking of $1 million a place. I'm talking about the guy just starting out.
Yep.
I have
Can I jump in for a second?
Absolutely. Why not?
Okay. Thank you. I just want to say that one, I'm definitely interested in the programming that you're putting together. That's very aligned with what C.E.A.S.E wants to do. So I'll definitely follow up with you. We're having an event on April 28th that really kind of covers some of that terrain. So I would love the opportunity to support your efforts. I just want to say that when it comes to the little guys on the street, that you'd be surprised how many of them are following the conversation as well. I mean, marijuana legalizing in New York is a big deal, and they are wondering just as much as we are wondering how they can be in the space. They're wondering how they can get in the space. So I'm sure that they will be receptive to outreach. I've had lots of great feedback in the planning of our Legacy to Legal event that we're having on April 28th. And lots of interest already on the ground. And there are also examples of people in other spaces that have made that journey and who can share their stories. And this idea that we're just kind of giving them a handout or a hand up, I just want to address that for a moment, because these are people that are bringing real anecdotal knowledge about the industry, about plants, about consumers and people that they have been, supplying in some cases for decades to the table. So it really, at its best can be an exchange of information and a situation where we are learning and growing from each other, and that their inclusion in the industry, in fact, makes it stronger. I don't think anyone is under any illusions that even in New York with these great equity provisions as a result of being iterative and looking around the country and seeing what worked and being able to say, hey, if we try it this way and we provide an opportunity for day one equity, right, that we can actually give these legacy folks, our social equity applicants, a real chance to have a seat at the table. I think the goal is really an inclusive industry where you can be a small business coexisting peacefully with the big players that we know are already here, but two will inevitably come because of the size and scale of the New York market.
Now, believe it or not, time flies when you're talking about, well, time has flown. And under those conditions, some of my best jokes I never give. I do have a filter inside my head, and you just don't see it. So under those conditions, I'm going to let everybody have a last word on this issue. We're going to go backwards. We're going to start with Ellen. And Jim, and we're going to go to Zeta, and then we're going to go to you, Ms. Dawson, and then we'll end with Brad, who I've been picking on all morning or all afternoon. He'll never come on my show again, but that's all right. Ms. Bolin, what is your takeaway from all of this? What would you tell this emerging market?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up from what Jim said. No matter what, if you're a minority-based company or a large company, you all need security. Okay, what do you have in that dispensary, or what do you have at that grow house? Cash, as we discussed, and product. Okay, so you need the cameras, you need the access control, you need the video surveillance. Every state's different. Trust me, Jim and I, we've been involved in all states. Some need video surveillance to go back 90 days. I don't know what New York will be. Some are 60, some are 30. I think Pennsylvania is 1 year. So being compliant is so important. And the auditors can walk right in, or inspectors, so to speak, can walk in, and they can shut your doors if your video surveillance doesn't go back far enough. So or you don't have enough cameras, which are based basically on the square footage of your space or your grow or whatever it may be. So no matter if you're a minority or not, security is really number one. You have to be compliant. And enough said.
All right, Jim.
So
any blanks you want to put in?
Yeah, the one point I'd like to make. So, social equity is a big part of all cannabis, recreational cannabis and medical cannabis across the United States. I like the lead that New York is taking in trying to strengthen that social equity aspect that other states have fallen down in. I did some light reading. I read the 128-page bill cover to cover. It was quite enjoyable. I do it before I go to bed at night. I'm just kidding. But there is mention in the bill, and I would be curious, maybe Brad can answer this question or maybe allude to it a little bit more. I did read in the bill that they are going to provide zero interest loans or low interest loans for economic equity, so people can get in this business. So there is less of a barrier to entry in this business, because Senator, you are right. A dispensary to open up on average anywhere in the United States is 600 to 1.3 million all in. You need a lawyer, a cannabis lawyer, and you start going down the list, and it really becomes a barrier to entry for the folks that this was meant for in the beginning. So I'd like to close and say thank you again for including us in this. Ellen and I would love to participate in the next panel discussion that you're going to have. And we would answer any questions you or your office has about this and helping your constituents.
And just to add to that, Imani, if you could send us some information on your organization. Jim and I speak with people all the time who are looking to get into the cannabis industry, now in New York specifically. So I'd love some information on it. Perhaps I can pass them your way.
Thank you. Will do, Ellen.
Okay.
Let's rush to Green Rush.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, Brad and your team and Senator Krueger, I mean, they've done a wonderful job on putting a lot of this together. This is based off best practices and policies that I've seen from state to state to state over the last decade. And you guys have done a really good job in terms of getting all the licenses together and looking at this from a very, great perspective. I'd hope that you guys wouldn't put a limit on licensing, because that's obviously going to limit a lot of things in terms of the, robust economic opportunity for all these folks. So, but other than that, you guys did a fantastic job. And I'd say for the viewers and audience out there, I mean, just don't let anything hold you back. Get educated, get involved in the conversation. There's a lot to be learned, and there's a lot of opportunity for you guys. I think that there's, a significant amount of things happening right now, and this is now the time is to do it. I mean, in terms of, securing that opportunity for yourself and, potentially even your own dreams. So thank you so much, Senator, for having me on, and all you guys. I would love to connect with all you. And Imani, I know Rashida, she's a good friend of mine too, as well. She did a great job on that book. And so definitely I would love to connect with you guys again, and of course, participate as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Dawson, you certainly have to tell me how I get a copy of your sister's book, uh, and I suspect that she will be very popular in the days to come. Don't cease. Please continue.
Senator Sanders, you have connections, so don't worry about it. You have connections. We will make sure you get a copy. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this really robust conversation. As a native New Yorker, and someone who grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, which is one of those communities that was definitely impacted by the drug war, I am so excited about the future for New York. There's so many possibilities. As a woman, I'm thrilled at what these two women legislators did in our legislative bodies, their vision and, and their direction. And there is tremendous amount of opportunity for everyone, which is what makes me particularly excited. My takeaway to folks, to kind of echo what Zeta said, is to educate yourselves. We fought for this. It's here. What happens next is entirely up to us. That's why C.E.A.S.E is working to provide community-based education. There are so many community-based groups on the ground, organizers having conversations, elected officials. Take advantage of that. Take advantage of organizations that already exist, like Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Women Grow, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, for people of color who are interested in this space. I think that they need to take the first step, learn about the cannabis market. And so when our now legal framework is fully built out in the next year to 18 months, they'll be ready on day one to participate. And that there's also room for everyone. Everyone doesn't have to be an entrepreneur. Some people don't aspire to own their own businesses. Maybe you just want a good paying job so you can pay the kind of rent that it costs to live in New York City. And cannabis can absolutely afford that. So look out for training programs. Look out for educational opportunities. Look for opportunities to join existing businesses. The future is, it's unwritten, and it's up to us to write it.
Well done. Well done. Well, Brad, I have picked on you from the beginning of this show to the end. You will have the penultimate word here. Usher us into this.
I love to talk cannabis. So I think for me, the next step is we need to figure out, the agency needs to get set up, and its first priority needs to be figuring out what we are doing in terms of things like loans, how we're going to set those up and make those available and publicize them. Getting an incubator plan off the program off the ground from day one. And I'll say Oakland did have the first one, and that was, there was a time when that was the only place to even look at, and we did back in the day. I can't remember when we did that, but it was maybe the second version of the bill or something, where we started to say, oh, the Oakland's doing something that looks really interesting. So that is an example of something we could learn from another state that was on the better side as opposed to the disappointing side. But for me, and I think for Senator Krueger, following what's going on with the setup of the agency and making sure that they are moving rapidly on the most important parts of this, which are linking up the people we want to be working in this industry with the opportunities they will need to succeed.
Well, let me say thank you to Senator Liz Krueger and Majority Leader Peoples-Stokes, Crystal Peoples-Stokes, for this 7-year trek, incredible, towards justice. My team had some small hand in giving you some stuff, giving you all, so we're happy to have done that. But let's be very clear, you guys, you pushed this boulder up the mountain and had it pushed back many times, but you've managed to get it over. Are we at the promised land? Not yet, but we are much, much better than we were before. This is a bill that this is a law, I stand corrected, that everyone will have to work on. Here, you cannot cease, Imani. You will have to really work on this one to ensure that we keep rushing towards towards justice. This is the type of thing that must be ushered in, that you have to have your hands on. You can't leave this one alone, because there will be a rush of people going in and saying that they are ready to consult with you. But to some degree, the buyer must beware, but you do have to find the right people in the right place to work with. Because at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you are secure in so many ways. And cannabis, too, can be secure, but only if we work at it. So I want to thank everyone who has participated today. I know I could not do that twice. I really want to thank you very much for participating. We're going to have some fun with this. You see, justice is fun, my friends. Injustice is not fun, but justice can be fun. And and there's nothing wrong with having qualms and deciding that you don't want to participate in any respect. That is your right. And there is nothing wrong in the state of New York, from this point forward, of having a business and being in here. But just be aware that it is not as easy as it sounds. However, we are working to make it easy enough so that there will be an even playing field. Again, to all who have participated in today, I really appreciate. I understand it more than I started out, and I thought I understood it well then. I thank you very much for that. And again, my friends, this has been a show called Let's Be Clear, because we have cut through so much of the smoke and fog that is dimming this whole issue. And we are trying to get to a place where people can have an understanding. No fuzzy thinking here. We want clear, sober thinking on this issue as we deal with on every issue. My name again is Senator James Sanders Jr., and you are now clearer because you attended Let's Be Clear. Thank you very much, y'all. Take care.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great conversation.